Welcome Year 12. Today we are looking at the Holocaust and the historiographical debates about who was to blame for the final solution. Apologies now if the camera is shaky. Corporal Cocker is holding the camera. So what greater purpose can history have than to try and lead people towards a possible understanding of how this crime could ever have happened? Without an understanding of how it happened, you can't begin to look around the world and think why it might happen again. Many of you asked while we were in Auschwitz in the weekend whether I thought this could happen again. My answer to you was that yes, I did. Why is that? Is it because we don't know who to blame? Is it because we don't know how to apportion blame? Is it because as human beings we don't always hold up our hands in responsibility ourselves? Key question, and this is the name of a very, very famous book of the time, is Hitler's Willing Executions. And this independent study task is all about you trying to work out who you hold responsible for the Holocaust. And it's very, very controversial. It's so controversial, in fact, that Mr. David Irving has actually spent time in prison because of his denials of Hitler's responsibility and actually his denials of elements of the Holocaust himself. Daniel Goldhagen, in Hitler's Willing Executions, argues the final solution was the responsibility of the German people as a whole, not just Hitler and the Nazi Party. And today, as we go through some of the debates, I'm going to just talk about some of the things you need to think about whilst you're doing your research. So, questions you need to be going around your brain as you read the readings that I've given you is, to what extent was Hitler to blame? How far in the 1943, 1944, 1945 period, when Hitler spent a lot of time in the Bavarian mountains, can we say Hitler was fully in control of the war effort or implementing the final solution? Or were people by that stage so brainwashed by Hitler's ideology that that doesn't matter to us as historians? How responsible were his general lieutenants, Himmler, Heydrich and the SS, the most loyal of the Nazi members? To what extent did their ownership and their running of Auschwitz and Birkenau prove that actually these are the people that we need to blame? Think back to the euthanasia programme that we saw in 1939 onwards. How does this make doctors guilty? Think about the role of the doctors in Auschwitz themselves. You know, the doctors, the medics that chose to study medicine to make human race and human life better, that by 1941 onwards were choosing those that could live and those that they sent to the gas chambers. What about the Wehrmacht, or the German army? What was their responsibility as the war became harsher and harsher, especially in the Soviet Union after Operation Barbarossa in 1941? And then what about the normal people, the rail workers, the people that lived near the concentration camps, the people that on the death marches in 1945 assaulted returning Jews from Poland to Germany? And then what about the role of Britain herself? What about the Daily Mail article we saw in 1938 and 39 that said no Jews to England? How much must our country and other countries at the Evian conference how far must they take responsibility for what happened in the next 6 years? And then probably the most important question at all. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, was the final solution planned? Did he aim to get rid of the Jews by mass murdering them in 1933? Or was the final solution a real short-term response to problems that the war effort created? We'll go through some of these questions now. I've spoken a lot about intentionalism and structuralism. I thought it'd be useful just to recap the arguments here. Intentionalism is the argument that Hitler intended the final solution from the moment he took power and indeed the moment he wrote Mein Kampf. The extermination of the Jews was Hitler's main political aim since the mid-20s, or even earlier. The murder of the Jewish people was intended. Think about the words that can give you a clue to remember which side is which. The motivation was almost entirely ideological, and all policies of Hitler's, especially racial policies, were aimed towards the final solution. He never intended Jews to live. However, structuralist historians would argue that exterminating Jews only emerged as an aim much later, possibly not even until as late as 1941 and 1942 at the Wannsee Conference. And it was driven from below and by practical considerations which were caused by the war. In this theory, the murder of the 6 million Jews was not planned. It happened by accident, and it means that the Jewish policy got carried away, became almost sensationalised is the wrong word, but became a lot more extreme than it possibly ever meant to be, as wartime pressures and individuals made the policy much, much more extreme. So, intentionalists, as I say, believe that Hitler was carrying out his master plan from the 1920s, when he came to power, straight through to Auschwitz. This was intended, Hitler was in control, and every policy was aimed towards it. He perceived that Jews were the root of evil in a world and should be eliminated. But the argument that historians have always had trouble over is, what does the word elimination mean in some of Hitler's speech? Does it mean mass deportation, i.e. the Madagascar Plan in 1940, or the Lublin district of 40-41, or does he mean the mass slaughter of the final solution? So many historians would say that Hitler intended to kill the Jews. I would argue that sometimes these historians can be what's called a little anachronistic. That's almost looking at the end result of 1945 and saying, actually, that was planned every step of the way. That's quite a key historical mistake that you can make, because you look at the end result and you can always find evidence that fits, because you know what happens at the end. I would argue, actually, that sometimes some of Hitler's policies don't always point towards the final solution. We'll discuss these later. Structuralists, however, argue that Hitler drifted into the Holocaust rather than it being the final phase in the master plan. There are no written orders from Hitler saying all the Jews can now be killed. And this prompts debate regarding Hitler's role in the Holocaust. Different local areas, especially Eastern Europe, had different decisions at different times. You only need to look at the role of the Einsatzgruppen A versus Einsatzgruppen D, which we've spoken so much about, to remember how different people interpreted the policy and how extreme that became. Hitler's actions between 33 and 41 suggested not always intent on mass murder. The evidence for this is in 1940, more than half the Jews in Germany and Austria had fled or driven out of their countries. This seems an odd policy if you were aiming to kill them all. Actually, what made the final solution inevitable in the end was not the Nazi military success in 39-40, and by 1941, when they were in control of nearly the whole of Europe. By that stage, they had 11 million Jews under their control. There was nowhere left for them to drive out, especially after the failure of the Madagascar Plan. So, was the road to Auschwitz twisted? There was lots of bumps on the way. I would argue that's probably a stronger argument. Although, when we were at Auschwitz and you see the sheer industrial scale of what happened, it is also very easy to argue that to say that this happened by accident is naive at best. There isn't always an answer. History is fantastic because you can argue everything as long as you have the evidence. Structuralists also believe that Hitler was not always free to act as he wished and did not initiate every major development in the Third Reich. Actually, many structuralist historians today believe that Hitler was quite a weak dictator. In this argument, Himmler, Heydrich play a much more important role in the final solution. And actually, they were perhaps the biggest drivers in terms of policy. Again, look back at your notes. Look at the Himmler speech to the Einsatzgruppen in 1941. Look at the Heydrich role in the Wannsee Conference. How much were Hitler's fingerprints over that? Or were they actually his lieutenants that were making the policy more and more extreme? The government, he argues in this such a theory, was ineffective, feudal even, as powerful rulers vie for control. In such arguments, Himmler, Heydrich, Goebbels all make policies more extreme as they try and compete for Hitler's love. Historians in such structures like this view Hitler as opportunist, responding to events, lacking initiative, even lazy and indecisive. Again, something that can be seen increasingly true in 43, 44, 45, when he spends longer and longer in Bavaria. However, we must also criticise the way structuralists think. They too become too concerned with administration and government, rather than motive force and supported ideology behind it. I would argue, even if Hitler never ever signed anything saying we can kill all the Jews, perhaps his ideology, his speeches, his policy up until 1939 made the final solution almost inevitable. And maybe his lieutenants had been given enough autonomy to be able to implement such policy. But you then also need to think about when the war changed. And you must argue that the war changed dramatically for the Nazis in 1941 and 42, once it realised that Operation Barbarossa was not going to be the stunning success they'd hoped in the first half of 1941. Again, these are key things that when we're reading, when we're researching, we must really, really look out for when the policy change. So we come to the role of Mr. Himmler, who once said in 43, "We have the moral right, we had the duty to our people to do it, to kill these people who would kill us." What strikes me with a lot of Himmler's speeches are the ideology behind it. The idea that he really did believe that the Aryan race was threatened by the Jewish people. And actually, he genuinely believed, to the day he died, that he was doing the Aryan race a favour with his ideological policy against the Jews. He was the commander of the SS, the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. As the SS, he controlled that and the Gestapo, and in effect, sort of managed Heydrich. Well, that's a difficult thing to necessarily prove. He's an extreme racist, totally loyal to Hitler, and regarded by many as the architect of the genocide. When we think about Himmler, again, think about his speeches to the Einsatzgruppe in 41. Think about the role of the SS in the Holocaust and in the final solution, not only in the Einsatzgruppe, but in their control of the camps, such as Kelmau and Auschwitz-Birkenau. 7,000 SS members at Auschwitz-Birkenau. What roles did they have? They were taking orders from this man. Himmler was a leading organiser of the Holocaust. Founder officer in charge of the concentration camps, Einsatzgruppen, Himmler held firm command responsibility for implementing the industrial-scale extermination. But he also delegated considerable authority to Heydrich. Look at Heydrich's role in the Wannsee Conference when you're doing your research. It wasn't just Himmler in charge of the SS and policy. Heydrich also had clear fingerprints all over him. But since Himmler was one of the that had final command and gave the orders of the extermination to the SS, it could be argued he held more responsibility than Hitler. It's in terms of sometimes when you've got a big president or a big prime minister, how much do they really know about everything that is going on? Okay, as we discussed when we were in Auschwitz, if Miss Edie, how responsible would Miss Edie be if something went wrong in a classroom under a teacher? How responsible would Miss Edie be if something went wrong in the sixth form? Would that be my responsibility or would it be Miss Edie's responsibility? If I was implementing the day-to-day policies, would I not have to take more responsibility than Miss Edie? Although as ultimate leader, she would obviously have to take some responsibility too. Some interesting things to think about. Heydrich, there was a lot of writing here, and maybe we will come back to Heydrich at a later date, but please do look at his role in the Wannsee Conference. But also he comes out with some really very interesting quotes. Jews will be taken east, separated by sex. Those capable of work, those not will fall away through natural reduction. Death by the hands of the Germans would now be unifying all resources towards an orderly, efficient, coordinating mechanical process for destroying the Jews, all to be carried out under the auspices of Eichmann, he said at the Wannsee Conference. Again, this is a man that must clearly take a great deal of responsibility for what went wrong. Just have a read of that. I won't read that all out, but if you can just read what is on the board, I'll leave that up there for a second. They can pause it. They can pause it. We got to 15 minutes. 15 minutes? Bloody hell. We'll skip through. Mr. Rush tells me I'm wittering on. So we'll leave it at the SS, just quickly. The SS obviously replaced the SA as the major power in Nazi Germany after the Night of the Long Knives in 1934. By the time Hitler's appointment, the SS only had 280 members, but by the war, it was tens of thousands. We'll flip through. Again, in terms of the SS, I want you to think of their role in Auschwitz-Birkenau. I want you to think of their role in the Einsatzgruppe. And I want you to start thinking about orders versus implementation of orders. To what extent can you blame an SS member for implementing an order from his superior? Was there an option to say no? Think about the ordinary men, Reserve Battalion 101, and think about whether they could have said no. Now, I would argue the role of the SS is slightly different. However, again, there is a lot of evidence to